Hi, my name is Cami Blankman, and this is my PowerPoint over differentiating instruction. So it starts off by asking, what is differentiating instruction? So it's basically an approach to teaching in which they come together, like an approach where students come together and learn at the most effective way as possible. So it basically addresses students' needs around their learning style. It's a powerful way to address and provide learning opportunities for students. Differentiating instruction builds lessons, develops teaching material, and varies your approach to students based on their style of learning. So you kind of form your lessons around your students' needs. Basically in a way. It is basically just to shape your needs for your students, a group of students. So if one group is slower than another group, you can shape your lesson around each group. So that is the basic definition of differentiating instruction. Moving on to the next slide, how do teachers differentiate instruction? So teachers in a differentiated classroom, they align learning needs to the students, for example, content, process, and product. When teachers differentiate content, the same concept or skill is taught to each student, however, the curriculum used to each concept or skill might be different for each student. When teachers differentiate process, they teach the same concept or skill to each student again, however, the manner in which each student makes sense of the topic or skill can vary. Therefore, teachers should vary activities to students used to master the concept or skills. They can break these students down into groups of pairs and work on different activities throughout each day. When teachers differentiate product, they assess the same concept or skill for each student at the end of a unit of study. However, students often their students a variety of ways to demonstrate their knowledge. For example, they offer different ways, for example, like a video or written report to show their knowledge at the end of the study. Teachers must get to know their students in terms of readiness, interest, and learning profile. So, for example, readiness refers to the knowledge and skill level regarding given content. Teachers can determine the level at which students is working in a given area by examining the results of formal or informal testing. They can also examine work samples or even have their students perform a KWL, which is a chart, and it asks what I know, what I want to know, and what I have learned throughout a given content or area. Interest refers to topics, skills, or activities that is interesting to a student or inspires them. A teacher can determine this by simply just asking and discussing with the student what their interest is, or even having them write in a journal, what are your interests, and or even participate at the beginning of year in a classroom icebreaker activities where we get to know each student in the classroom. Learning profile, that refers to a preferred method of learning for new information. So teachers can assess students a preferred method way of learning by just simply observing them in the class. Just what way do students learn best in the classroom? And also just evaluate and grade a student performance. So teachers can grade on a student's performance. Next slide is, how do teachers prepare their students in their classroom for differentiating instructions? So teachers can use a variety of approaches to prepare their classroom for differentiating instruction. They can assess students on an ongoing basis and determine their readiness levels. They can also discuss with their students at the beginning of year what a differentiating instruction classroom may look like. So, for example, like back to the assessments, there are different types of assessments. They can do a before lesson assessment, for example, to assess a student's prior knowledge, skill level, and understanding. This helps the student or the teacher assign students to groups, maybe also during a lesson assessment. This can help the teacher determine what the student understands, also to inform teachers of needed instructional adjustment during the lesson. And an after lesson assessment, this is to help the teacher determine what students have learned, to aid teachers in assigning them to either new groups or to assigning them grades as well, and stuff like that for the following year. Also, having a well-organized classroom. This helps a teacher and their students make the best use of instructional time. So having that organized classroom helps create this structured environment the teacher should address in their classroom. For example, like using your floor space and bulletin boards and wall space. So utilizing all your space to help with the differentiated instruction classroom. They should also establish a set of rules and procedures. This way, students know what are expected of them in terms of rules and procedures. For example, your rules provide guidelines for your students to monitor their own behavior, and they remind them and motivate students to meet student behavioral standards. So these rules are set to just be a guideline for your students of what you expect of them. Your procedures should explain the process for carrying out a specific activity. And just overall, your classroom should have a good classroom behavior management system. So this would only help your students know and expect what you expect out of them. What does differentiated instruction look like in the classroom? So it can look like small group, individual group work, or even a whole group learning. So it can be noisy at sometimes because everybody's working together and collaborating. It can also be quiet as well. Just depends on your group work and everything. Students should be actively engaged in learning, so they should be paying attention to you as you are teaching the lesson and not doing something else. So they should be actively engaged into you and into the lesson. And basically a flexible environment, so there's students can basically learn in a way that will help them benefit or that will help them understand a topic or lesson overall. So listed below are some common classroom practices at your school, and I split them up onto each of their own slides, but I basically explained why they are not examples of a differentiated practice and describe what your colleagues can do differently. So I explained what my colleagues could do differently in each example. So the first one delivers instruction primarily by lecturing. So this is not an example of differentiating practice because not every student learns primarily by listening. I know when I am in a lecture, I tend to daze off or work on something else. I'm not really paying attention because it's just kind of boring when someone lectures. That's not how I learn best. I learn best by doing hands-on activities, and that's what I said ways my colleagues can do differently is by creating these hands-on activities. This way you know students are actively engaged in your lesson and you can keep them listening and engaged throughout many lessons, and just by playing videos or something different than just lecturing will only help them in each lesson. The next one is group students at the beginning of the year based on the previous year's achievement or test scores. This is not an example of differentiating practice because the teacher's just grouping them off of their previous test scores, and you don't want to group students off of their test scores, you want to group them based on their needs. And especially, I want to emphasize on their previous year's achievement test scores. If you're on a new year and they could probably forget something throughout the summer, so you want to reassess them and see what they are currently assessed at, so then you can group them based on their needs and not on their previous needs, because they could forget a lot of things during the year. In ways I said my colleagues can do differently is based on grouping them based on current achievement scores, or practice exam at the beginning of the year to see what or where students are in the current time. And the last one is gives bonus points for classroom participation. So this is not an example of differentiating practice, because you may have a shy student who is afraid to speak out and openly, and that was me in the classroom, and it kind of still is. I just like to sit there and see what other students have to answer or say, and I would know the answers at times, but you may have a student who is just answering the questions all the time and not letting other students answer, so that is why this is not an example of differentiating practice. In a way I said my colleagues can do differently is by calling out each student to answer the questions throughout the day. This way each student can participate equally throughout the day. And one way you can do this, which I see it all the time, is by writing every student's name on a stick and then drawing sticks for each question. So once a student answers, you put their stick aside, and they can no longer answer a question for that day. So that is one way I think you can do differently, by making sure everybody participates in the classroom equally. And so this is my PowerPoint over differentiating instruction.